Through email.
Send them through email? Okay.
Yeah, send them to my
I'll send them through email.
Comcast. But I'll look and see if they ended up in a box somewhere.
Okay.
I put mine on
Thank you.
Blackboard too, and I didn't see them.
Yeah.
Well then, yeah. Okay, just send them by email to me.
I'll email them.
So you Dropbox them, I guess.
Yes.
All right, I'll take a look. But go ahead and.
Has the date I submitted it just
What's that?
It has the time and date that I submitted it, so.
Okay. Yes. Does anybody know Julie Switzer?
And I was talking to her last night. I'm like, Julie?
Yeah, just email rather than Dropbox. Yeah. All right, let's talk about the first two chapters of Little John, and we'll do issues of theory and scholarship first. Now, a lot of this is orientation to the field and the way that theory is part of it. So if you have a question you'd like to ask about the field of communication studies, as part of this, feel free to ask it. So that's the best way for you to learn and understand. But Intro does a very good job of working on that. Now, just to look at the two words first off, the idea of scholarship is the idea of carefully done academic work, which is kind of rough for a lot of students today, because we are like rushed and we work. So the day has kind of gone by for a lot of us where this is what we do all day, where you're a full-time graduate student and you just do this. You get up in the morning and you start thinking about comm theory and you read stuff through the day, and then you go read some articles in the afternoon and you go to class. I don't know, is anybody doing that here? All right, good man.
No choice.
Yeah, well, good for you, because you'll be able to focus a little bit on it. And part of the idea of scholarship is that you can't be rushed to do it. There's a certain amount of leisure that sort of needs to be there, where you don't have to produce this now, where you can think about it, you can sleep on it, you can go about your life and mull it over in the back of your brain. And so a lot of times graduate students who work get really impatient with the academic voice or the academic writing, because you're like, well, you get to the point, for heaven's sake, But the reason they're not getting to the point is because they're thinking carefully about things. So I had to learn to take the time to read the things, and think about them. And so people will ask me about the reflections. They'll say, well, I'm not doing good on the reflections. Why am I not doing good on reflections? And 9 times out of 10, the reason is you just need to take time to do it and not just write it. You need to think, outline a little bit, or at least a brief outline of things I want to say, ways I want to connect theory vocabulary to my incident, and look for insightful ways that they merge with each other. And so if you're rushed, even cognitively, we understand that when your anxiety is up, you cannot think as well. I don't know if any of you do conflict management, conflict negotiation studies, but there are studies about brain function, and when you're anxious, you're not doing the abstract level of thinking that you need to do for scholarship. You need to be calm and not rush to do it well. So just keep that in mind with a lot of scholarship. It was the idea of people who had leisure to think and to tie things together from different places and to read broadly. A lot of us don't read broadly today. We read, what do I need to read? Instead of saying, oh, well, I see a reference to another book, I think I'll go read that book too. It doesn't happen a whole lot in our fast-paced graduate society. But scholarship is about that. It's about exploring, reading. You know, I've mentioned to you that my doctorate covered about 30% of all the graduate work I did. So I was interested in a lot of things. So I did a lot of outside reading. But my committee finally said to me, you've got to focus in and produce a product so we can sign off on you and get you out of here, because you're never going to leave if we don't do this. So scholarship is somewhat about leisure and having the time to do broad reading, which is what we're supposed to do in undergraduate life. You know, you're supposed to be exposed to a whole bunch of stuff and develop a liberal, not politically liberal, but a liberal view of the world and a lot of different perspectives, and you've read a lot of stuff. We don't have that a lot. So communication theory is part of an academic field called communication studies. And that field has a history to it. And the idea of communication theory has a history to it as well. There has not always been something called communication theory. And what is communication theory has been in dispute, and the whole definition of communication has been in dispute. So we are part of a field that is trying to find an identity and solidify an identity. And it's coming along pretty well these days, but that's what we're doing. So an academic field, by its very nature, has to have boundaries. It has to be clear what is in it, what makes it up. And so if you're in psychology or sociology, there's a field, and within the field there are all the things that make up an academic world. There are core theories. An academic field has core theories. It has journals. It has conferences. It has university departments. So there are things that make up an academic field of study. And we do have those journals. So in intro, you should be going over different journals that are in the field of communication. So there's a journal called Comm Theory, Communication Theory, a journal called Quarterly Journal of Speech, which is about rhetorical studies. That's my field.
When you're doing like research for communication, it's okay to go and like do something from a different field, like psychology or something like that.
Yes, it is. It's okay because of the way our field has developed. Communication studies have taken place in a lot of other academic fields as well. But we do have our own journals, and Text and Performance Quarterly, the Communication Teacher, Educator, you know, there's all kinds of journals in our field. So you should find the journals that are relevant to your interest, and as a scholar, you ought to browse them just to see what people write about, what people talk about in that particular field. Journals tend to have a focus based on the editor of the journals. And so we have, for now, communication has emerged as a central concern in the United States in the last 110 years or so. So before that, the oratory was often housed in English departments. So if you wanted to study rhetoric or speeches, they would send you to the English department. But come around the 1900s, that there began to be this, I think part of it was the technology, the rise of technologies of communication. Part of it was the wars and the political use of technologies of communication. We began to see the power that communication had in propaganda, public speaking, and in group decision making. So those two things, persuasion and group decision making, were core issues early in the field. We wanted to understand how these things worked and how they could go bad. And so a lot of money was devoted to these things. with World War II, it got even more intense. So there was also the sense in the 1900s that we were going to enter the time when we were going to solve all social problems. I don't know if any of you have studied American history much, or if in English this was a point too, with Matthew Arnold in England, with the idea that we could seed communication into society in books, good literature that would lift the moral character of people and would establish a better society free of all of the ills. There was a whole progressive progress model going on in the 1900s. And they expected, when they hit the 1900s, there was this huge expectation that between technology and the universities, and we were going to be able to make this a wonderful century. Didn't turn out that way. In case you want to look, we had the 2 world wars. We had the horrors of use of technology in murderous ways. And so that hope was dashed, which is part of why modernism gave way to postmodernism. Because modernism failed, according to some people. It didn't live up to its expectations. So communication then ended up emerging out of this mess as something that was very important, especially as the technology expanded. And so most schools now have departments of, broadcast. When I went to Temple, I was in the radio. I studied with the radio, television, and film people. We were all in the School of Communication and Theater. That's the way it was. And so radio, television, film, and theater people all studied together. We shared classes together on a regular basis. So different universities have structured their departments differently. But most schools have programs. Now, schools have different perspectives on how they do it. And we'll talk about the difference, again, between science, humanities, and the social sciences. Some schools are known for being places where you do quantitative scientific communication research. So when you were looking for graduate schools, a lot of people come to Montclair for geographic reasons. Probably most of you are here for geographic reasons. But if you were a student who was, I could go anywhere in the country and take graduate studies in communication, you would find that there are schools that specialize in different things. And like Ohio State is known for quantitative research. And Michigan State was known for its rhetorical studies. So you had different universities that had a particular type of communication studies that they focused on and were known for. And they were marked by that. Temple University, since I've left, has closed its rhetorical studies school, which is what I went to. And they have targeted negotiation and mediation. So they have gone out, hired people like Joe Folger and Trish Jones, who have made a name in mediation and legal settings and peace negotiations and conflict management. They hire them in, they create a department around them, and then they attract students who want to study that. So that's the way a lot of communication programs work. Montclair is kind of a generalist in a sense, but it's developing more of a focus. Dr. Kelshaw is working hard now. Dr. Lamiziano is working hard to give it more of the PR focus. So they're kind of moving into that. But I've been here since '92, teaching graduate program and courses, and so we've been a lot of generalist program over the years. By the way, did anyone go to the graduate? Did you go to the graduate meeting? And I didn't go to it. I mean, so is that what the conversation is about the direction the graduate school is moving in?
And just notice like how they're like how it's changing. So like the people who are in the change, like what they're gonna have to do, and like
Yeah.
how it's gonna like substitutions and stuff.
Yeah, for some of you, to get the program straight is in the transition. It's going to be a little hard. But we're still moving right to PR and org. That's the way we're going.
It's going to be a combination.
Oh, a combination one.
It's going to be PR and or comm as one.
As one, okay. Yeah.
Marketing systems.
Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense for us. Yeah, I teach a lot of the like I say, I teach a lot of general courses. So, all right. So that's where the field is. So there are different schools that have different focuses, and your textbook points out that there's a difference between American and European studies of communication, and so you know we tend. In general, a lot of American universities focus on quantitative scientific methods. European, we think anyway, focus on humanities and more interpretive, cultural, historical perspectives on communication studies. But you know, when I went to do rhetorical studies at Temple, it was very little quantitative. So it just depends where you go. And it also talks about the fact that there are emerging non-Western communication studies programs, African, American-centered, Asian-centered communication studies programs that are asking, can we conceptualize the traditions of communication study in these cultures and traditions in new ways? So that's a whole other field that I'm not acquainted with, but is out there. So theory then is, and academic fields are meant to be a systematic study of experience. So like Bob Craig says, it emerges out of the everyday life of people. People ask questions. We then ask those questions systematically, using methodologies, using rigorous following of processes to do the analysis that is intended to lead to understanding, explanation, to principles. Little John calls it principles. I call it transformation, but making a difference. How do we make a difference in communication practices? Theory development is an ongoing process. So I think in your book it has the quote from I forget who it is, that says, you know, 100 years from now, probably the theories that we're using won't even be used. You know, and if you're science in its best admits that it is provisional knowledge based on current understandings. So the book by Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, is a very useful book if you're interested in the history of science or the philosophy of science. That we do change, that paradigms change over time, that we begin to think in new ways about physics, and we begin to think in ways about communication as we have new developments. I'm sure that as we get more genetic DNA studies, brain scan studies, there's going to be a lot more communication research based on biological and chemical things that we're going to study, about people's attitudes and things like that. So it'll change. So science is a provisional process of improving knowledge. So science at its worst says, this is the way it is. This is true, you know. And we'll talk about truth and epistemology in a little bit. But science, that is not a true scientist. The true scientist says, this is, given the evidence we have, given the paradigms we're using, this is our best explanation at this point. So it's provisional. It's always in process. And you are being invited to join the field and to continue that process, to learn from the theories that have been given, challenge them, question them, critique them, expand them, extend them, create new ones. You're part of the field. And that's, by the way, the difference between a master's and a doctorate. I don't know if you understand that difference. A master's means you master some knowledge within the field. A doctorate must be awarded on an original contribution to the field. So that's different. So you don't, when I started my doctoral program, I thought it was like a big master's program. You know, I thought it was like, I'm just going to learn a lot of stuff, pass some tests, and then but it's not. You have to do original research that extends or expands the field. And that's your admission to the academic doctorate, because you have added to the field. So that's the difference there. So, and like your book says, defining communication is impossible. So the question becomes, what's functional? So how wide do you define communication, how narrow, and how useful is the definition? Because the definition guides your research. So you want to have useful definitions that are at the appropriate scope. So in different settings, it will mean different things. Has anybody, though, solved the problem and found the definition for communication? It'd be great. A lot of the books I use try to get at it by saying it's human interaction around symbols. That's the way they try to do it. And that includes some things, it leaves out other things.
But also, like in one of the books, it says, I think it was in this class, maybe it was in the class, but it says there was like categories from everything from like